Good evening and welcome to another episode of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. I'm your host, Melissa Whitecross, and I'm streaming to you live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Tomorrow will mark exactly a year since we launched Conservation Conversations, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to say a personal thank you to the BirdLife South Africa team, in particular my co-host Andrew de Block, as well as CEO Mark Anderson, and the many speakers without whom we would not have been able to bring you the 47 exciting and interesting episodes which have aired on the channel so far. I'd also like to thank the many sponsors and of course all of you, our audience, who have invited us into your homes or wherever else you like to stream our show from every Tuesday night for the past year. It has been a privilege to produce the show for all of you, and thank you for the continued support, both in person as well as those of you who have contributed financially to the production of these webinars. Now tonight, Bronwyn Maree will be showcasing the incredible world of migratory birds and the conservation efforts taking place along the East Atlantic Flyway as part of the BirdLife partnership. But before we dive into tonight's main event, here are a few announcements and some housekeeping. You can communicate with us using the Zoom chat room, and remember to select all panelists and attendees if you want everyone listening to be able to see your message. Questions for our speaker can be posted into the Zoom Q&A box throughout the webinar. And if you're watching us on Facebook Live, you can use the comment feed for your comments and questions. Our speaker will answer these at the end of the webinar. Using the hashtag Conservation Conversations, you can let us know on all social media channels that you're tuning in. And you can also catch up on any of our previous episodes via the BirdLife South Africa YouTube channel and our podcast, available on all major streaming services. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, which helps us to grow the support for our webinar content. Now, a big thank you to all of you who have generously supported these webinars over the past year. To celebrate a year on air, we're giving our listeners a chance to donate and win the incredible Ultimate Companion for Birding in Southern Africa, written by Peter Ginn and Jeff McKilleron. Unfortunately, this competition is only open to South African-based viewers, but to qualify for entry into April's competition, simply donate a minimum of 100 Rand via the Quicket Donations platform before 30th of April 2021. There is absolutely no limit on the number of entries, so the more you donate, the better your chance of winning this incredible set of books. Simply scan the QR code using your phone camera or visit the Conservation Conversations website to find the link to the donations portal. I'll also be posting the link to the donations portal into tonight's chat box after this intro. Your contributions help us to keep these talks free for all to learn and enjoy. BirdLife South Africa's 5th virtual Learn About Birds or LAB conference will run on 27 and 28 May 2021 through the Zoom platform. Registrations can be carried out through the BirdLife South Africa website, which is displayed on screen at the moment, and the program for the event is now available on the LAB website. To find out more or to register for this event, please visit the BirdLife South Africa website or email lab2021@birdlife.org.za. Our 2021 AGM is also going virtual this year and will be held on 29 May after the LAB conference. To register for this important event, please visit the Flock page under the Events tab on our website or email flock2021@birdlife.org.za. Now, as we navigate the COVID-19 impacted world, we are excited to announce another virtual event. Our virtual African Bird Fair is making a return to your screens. And this year, it is set to take place on 30 and 31 July 2021. Be sure to watch BirdLife South Africa's media channels to find out more, and make sure that you do not miss out on this world-class virtual event. Now, BirdLife South Africa is excited to bring back the Cycle in the Bush, our annual mountain bike fundraising event, together with Escape Cycle Tours and Abelana Game Reserve. We're pleased to invite you to join internationally renowned commentator Phil Liggett on a 3-day adventure in the gorgeous Abelana Game Reserve in the Greater Kruger National Park region. Come join us for some great cycling and soul restoration in the bush from Friday 24 September to Monday 27 September 2021. Contact lindsay.smith@birdlife.org.za for more information and to book your spot. I can highly recommend this event. Phil is an incredible man, and you do not want to miss out on this opportunity to spend time with him on 2 wheels in the bushveld. But finally, we can commence with tonight's main course. I would like to give a big Conservation Conversations welcome to Bronwyn Maree, BirdLife South Africa's East Atlantic Flyway Initiative Project Manager. Bronwyn began her journey with BirdLife South Africa as part of the Albatross Task Force in 2008, where she carried out her duties as an instructor before going on to lead the ATF team. Bronwyn was awarded a Future for Nature Award in 2014 for her work with the deep sea hake trawl fisheries to reduce seabird bycatch. If you've not watched our previous webinars on the work currently being carried out by the Albatross Task Force, I'd highly recommend catching up on these via our YouTube channel. The seabird conservation team is really doing outstanding work, and it is highly worth watching what they're up to. But Bronwyn took a brief hiatus from BirdLife South Africa in 2019 to employ her skills in tackling the human-wildlife conflict issues surrounding baboons in the Cape. But she came to her senses and returned back to BirdLife South Africa, just like a migratory bird, last year to commence her role as the East Atlantic Flyway Initiative Project Manager. Bron, it's great to have you with us on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to share this important work with all of us. And I'm going to hand over to you to please share your presentation with us. And thank you so much for joining us. Fantastic. Bron, over to you. I'm going to stop bantering.
Great.
Enjoy the show, everybody.
Sorry. Thank you for having me on the show for the 1-year celebration. It's been a great year so far, and hopefully this presentation won't disappoint. As Melissa's already alluded to, I come from a slightly different background. So let's see what I can share with you and how I can excite you about the flyway that I'm working with. So can you imagine having 2 homes that you have to move between every year? I know that there's some of you in the audience or people that you may know that do this and who are also known as swallows. This will be the story of the real swallows and other migrants and their travels along one of the most invisible highways in the sky, known as East Atlantic Flyway. What comes to mind when you think of migration? I think many of you will first come to mind with the Great Wildebeest Migration, the largest migration of any animal in the world. But migration is found in all major animal groups, including mammals, such as the whales which come up our Western Cape coastline. Fish, many of us will be aware of the salmon migrations. Reptiles, amphibians, insects, such as locusts, dragonflies, and butterflies, such as the well-known monarch butterfly, which migrates a very large distance, as well as crustaceans, such as the Christmas Island red crab, and of course, birds. A great example of migration for birds is the Amur falcons, which move from Siberia to southern Africa with a few weeks stopover in India. From India, the birds fly non-stop across the Indian Ocean, coinciding with the migration of dragonflies from India to East Africa. Migration is often a fascinating topic for many people, so I thought I would give a little bit of background about the types of migrations you get and the reasons that animals migrate in the first place. So you get species that just must migrate each year to survive. They just have to do it. These migrations tend to be very consistent year to year, and both are consistent in timing and the path that they take. They are almost always complete migrations, and by that I mean all individuals of the species will migrate together. So this includes species such as the Arctic terns. They usually tend to be your longest migrations and are known as obligate migrators. The next type of strategy that you get is known as a facultative migration. It's done by individuals who make the choice to migrate or not. Often this choice is made on whether there's resources available or not. These migrations are often shorter in distance, and they are often what we call partial migrations, when only some of the individuals migrate when the time comes, while others will not. 2 other types of migration strategies are differential migration, where you have species that have different migration patterns for different groups. So you may have your younger animals migrating shorter distances than your older individuals, such as the cases in many of the gull species, or where males and females migrate at a different time of year or across a different distance. The last type of migration is interruptive migration, and this occurs when some species will migrate in some years, but not in others. So blue jays are a good example of this type of migration, when all of the birds will migrate suddenly, for when, example, food has run out in the area. So traveling long distances is obviously very energy expensive and can be quite dangerous, with a number of threats faced along their journey. A species will often only choose to migrate if the benefits outweigh the costs of getting from one site to another or to your new location. So why would animals choose to migrate? The most common reasons to migrate are to move between sites that offer necessary resources, such as sites for breeding, feeding, resting, or raising young. It's also to avoid the seasonal environmental changes, as many of us humans do, such as droughts, extreme cold temperatures, or flooding. This also makes it often difficult for them to find food. And the last reason is to avoid predation. Spring and summer migrants often take advantage of there being less predators and less competition from other species in the UK, compared to warmer, more southerly countries, for example. So exactly how animals, and particularly birds, migrate has fascinated people for a very long time. And there's been a large amount of research into exactly how these birds manage to navigate many, many kilometers across the globe. Each species uses a different set of skills or techniques to find their way, and many species are limited and cannot use all the methods that I'm going to describe. However, most of the species have found that they can use multiple skills so that they can use different cues as they get closer to their destination, or potentially as conditions may change. So the techniques I'm going to describe now are largely focused on bird migration, but obviously apply to other animals. So some species can determine the direction they are moving in by looking at the position of the sun in the sky. Some birds are able to also detect ultraviolet light passing through clouds. So this obviously helps them when they need to track the position of the sun on a cloudy day. Some species have been shown to use the constellations or stars in the sky to navigate. This has been successfully tested on captive migratory birds in a planetarium, where they changed the orientation of the starry sky and the birds tried to change the direction in which they flew. Other species can sense the magnetic field by the Earth's north and south poles, as well as being distorted by landforms. It's been proposed that birds have a trace of heavy metal elements in their brains, eyes, or bills that allow them to respond to these magnetic fields and help them to orientate themselves in the right direction for these extremely long journeys, much like an internal compass. Birds can also learn from their parents, similar to us, where they learn and join on the first long-haul flight. Lastly, it is believed that it is just genetics and that certain species know out of instinct where to go. There are a number of cases recorded where young birds have left before and after their parents and still reached the same destination. So it's really interesting to see that a number of tools are used to ensure these birds move from point A to point B. So let's get into the flyways and the bird species that utilize these flyways. So approximately 1,800 of the world's 11,000 bird species migrate across numerous country boundaries. As you can see, it's a massive highway in the sky right across the planet. There are known to be 8 flyways globally, and BirdLife International's Flyways program focuses on protecting these birds across all of these major flyways. So just in brief, you have the Americas flyway, which consists of 3 flyways that connect North America with the Caribbean and Central and South America. Then you have the African Eurasian flyway, which is 3 flyways that connect Europe and Northern Asia with the Mediterranean, Middle East, and Africa. The Central Asian flyway is a flyway that connects Northern Asia with Southern Asia and the Middle East. And lastly, the East Asian Australasian flyway connects Northeast Asia with Southeast Asia, Australia, and New Zealand. The East Atlantic flyway, which is the one we'll focus on this evening, and that's displayed on your screen, is the network of sites that these migratory birds use to travel thousands of kilometers, migrating from their northern breeding grounds in Eurasia to their wintering areas in Western and Southern Africa. Along this journey, the birds rely on a series of high-quality coastal and inland sites as stopover points to provide them with a resting place and an opportunity to feed. The East Atlantic Flyway Initiative, shortened to EFI, and the flyways which we are speaking about, is important for shorebirds, both coastal and wader species, as well as numerous landbirds. Approximately 90 million birds rely on this connected network of sites. Waders in particular depend on key sites, many of which we already know about and which are well known and shown in the map on the right-hand side of the screen. Some of the ones closer to home, being in the Western Cape, is the Langebaan Lagoon in the West Coast National Park. This is an incredibly important site within South Africa for many of our migratory wading species, as well as many resident birds. As we know where these key sites are for waders, the conservation of these species is a lot easier to achieve. Moving on to landbirds, these landbirds migrate along pathways as well, but they migrate on broad fronts, utilizing multiple stopover and overwintering sites. If you're looking at the map on your left-hand side of the screen, you can clearly see how spread out these landbirds' migrations are. In a recent study by Finch et al., the mean distance between two individual landbirds from the same population during a non-breeding season was 743 kilometers. 62% of the species had a distance of more than 500 kilometers between individuals. Now you can understand why conserving landbirds is so much more difficult than managing waders. They follow a number of different routes, facing several different threats along their journeys, and often cross many rapidly changing landscapes. So what are the threats and the causes to the changes of these landscapes that these birds have to face along these long journeys? These include habitat loss and degradation, urbanization and the altering of the use of the land cover. Migrant birds will now have to navigate a human-altered landscape during their migrations. There's agricultural expansion, which is one of the key threats which drives bird populations into decline globally. Hunting and illegal killing is another known threat. In 2015, a BirdLife report estimated that in the Mediterranean alone, there were more than 25 million birds killed illegally. And in Africa, many of us have probably heard of many of the vultures being poisoned as a result of human-wildlife conflicts and poaching, as well as for the use of traditional medicine. Collisions with infrastructure are also well known, such as wind turbines or electric pylons. Pollution such as noise, sound, and air also have a negative impact. Tourism activities, such as vehicles driving on beaches or motorized water sports on key estuaries and water bodies, also plays a part in having a negative impact and causing a threat on the flyway. Overexploitation and resources, as well as climate change, which may cause birds to migrate earlier due to the high temperatures, or some birds to decline further as their breeding and wintering grounds no longer suit their needs. So just going into a little bit of detail, habitat loss and degradation is one of the major threats facing these migratory species. In these images, you can see a natural landscape with a mix of trees, shrubs, and grasses on the left-hand side, while the image on the right is an example of what we call bush encroachment, where this is now displaying an imbalance and an increase in a single species or dominating species within the area. There are a number of issues associated with the bush encroachment, and this includes a reduction in the diversity of species, as well as a change in the species in which area they are found. Some additional examples of habitat loss, and I'm sure many of you in the Western Cape will be aware of these, includes the introduction of alien species and erosion of key estuarine habitat sites or habitats, which are important for migrants. Alien invasive species, in particular plants, can cause substantial environmental and economic damage. They outcompete natural species and can change the relationships between species and the functioning of the ecosystem. For example, they might change fire regimes as well as the nutrient cycling in the ecosystem. Estuaries are a major stopover site for migrants. Unfortunately, the banks of many of these estuaries are eroded. This can be either due to coastal erosion, upland developments that are happening, or human disturbance. Erosion can cause sedimentation in estuaries, impacting the feeding of these migrant birds. Restoration of these areas and revegetation of the banks is key to migrant survival. Here is an example of agricultural expansion, in which the entire landscape is adapted to farming and any natural habitat has been removed. You can now imagine trying to navigate this new changed landscape as a migrant bird. It wouldn't be very easy. This is often also to the detriment of wetlands, which are important for waders, and often entails the removal of trees, which are incredibly important for migratory landbirds, as well as other components of a habitat which birds migrating from north to south or vice versa rely on. In many of the areas, pesticides and poisons are also used, which can seep into the water source and have an impact on numerous aspects of biodiversity. So this is where the East Atlantic Flyway Initiative, or as I mentioned earlier, EFI for short, steps in. It was established in 2015 by a number of BirdLife partners at a meeting held in Ghana. 5 partners joined forces and initiated this program. And these partners were VBN, the partner in Netherlands, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds in the UK, who also fund my position, the AAO in Tunisia, the Ghana Wildlife Society, and of course, BirdLife South Africa. The idea behind the EFI program is that partners along the flyway lead the work. It's not up to 1 or 2 individuals. It needs to be a flyway-wide approach to ensure the conservation of migratory species and their habitats along the entire flyway. Collaboration and transboundary conservation projects are critical to ensure that the entire flyway is protected. The program of work is developed with the involvement of 34 partners, as seen on your screen in the map on the right-hand side, which make up the East Atlantic Flyway, covering over half of the countries in the flyway. The program of work and coordination is run through the EFI task force, which is made up of representatives of the 5 partners I mentioned previously. The EFI partners focus their work on ensuring coastal wetlands and estuaries are protected for shorebirds, and that land is sustainably utilized and formally protected for the safe passage of landbirds. The overarching aims of the program are to improve the status of migratory bird species by addressing the threats they face, or identifying the threats they face, and then identifying mitigation measures that address these threats, to increase and strengthen the capacity of the partners along the flyway, which is a really important part of this program. As I said, it's a partner-led and partner-driven initiative, as well as the implementation of projects from specific priority sites locally to joint collaborative projects which cross country borders. Looking at EFI in the Southern African context, and this is where I fit in, is that in the southern region, the countries of focus are South Africa, Botswana, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Namibia. In some of these countries, there are BirdLife partners through which we collaborate and work together with, namely Birdwatch Zambia, BirdLife Botswana, and BirdLife Zimbabwe. In Namibia and Angola, where there are no BirdLife partners currently established, we are working with other biodiversity NGOs, such as the Kasama Foundation in Angola and the Namibia Nature Foundation in Namibia, as well as the associated government departments. The project is partnering with and supporting countries to get them to understand as well as report their biodiversity. Through training and capacity building, countries will improve their knowledge on the key threats these species face along the flyway, improve the conservation and ultimately the management of the important sites that these species depend on, as well as expanding the network of areas of protected and conserved areas, as well as influencing policy, which is critical to ensuring the protection of migratory species, nationally, regionally, and internationally. It is really important to demonstrate the value of the coordination of all these projects across the flyway to ensure the continued support of action. Fundraising is, of course, always an integral part of the work, particularly for regional projects that work across boundaries. Good areas to focus on to achieve a higher impact are transfrontier conservation areas, many of which I'm sure you have heard of, such as the Kalahari up north, as well as the Iona Skeleton Coast, TFCA, or Transfrontier Conservation Area, which borders Namibia and Angola. One of the key areas for collaboration within the region underneath my project is in the Kavango-Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area, or also commonly known as KAZA TFCA. This is the world's largest TFCA at approximately 520,000 kilometers squared. The KAZA TFCA is enormous and is larger than Australia and Austria put together, and is twice as large as the United Kingdom. It lies in the Kavango and Zambezi river basins, where Angola, Botswana, Namibia, Angola, and Zimbabwe converge. There are more than 3,000 plant species throughout the park, over 600 bird species, as well as 128 reptile species, 15 known amphibian species, and not to mention the big five and vast numbers of mammals within the region. This will be a key area of engagement for the southern region of the East Atlantic Flyway. Local communities within this area are also an integral part of this TFCA. They are involved in the management and the growth of it. And apart from conservation, one of the key aims within the TFCA is to provide local communities with alternative livelihoods to bring in an income while sustaining the conservation of this important biologically diverse area. One of the projects which is being developed is the creation of birding routes and the development of aviatourism within the region. The Southern African work within IFI can be grouped into three categories: species work, area-based conservation, and policy and advocacy. I'm going to briefly go through each of these and provide examples of projects which are being implemented to address the three pillars I've just mentioned, as well as the various threats that I described earlier in this presentation. Within the species work, the aim is to establish species monitoring and research of threatened and common bird species to better understand their threats and the trends that these species are undergoing. If the impacts of these threats are possibly reduced, or we are able to reduce them, the resilience of these populations along the flyway will be vastly improved. An example of the work here is BirdLife South Africa is looking at establishing a monitoring project for the European roller within the Kruger National Park. It may seem that you see a European roller on every second pole or tree when you're there, but there is evidence that the species is declining. This will provide valuable information on the numbers of birds in the area, as well as the trends over time once this project has been running for a long period. The idea is also to expand this into countries further up the flyway, such as into Botswana and Zimbabwe. One of the many ways in which scientists or the general public, or citizen scientists or the general public can be involved, is to get involved in citizen science initiatives, where you can submit data and any migrants that you see through the birding apps such as BirdLife, or through monitoring projects such as SAST, the South African Bird Atlas Project 2. This data is invaluable in understanding the arrival and departure dates and whether these change, and particularly reporting rates and trends in these species. It will help us to understand whether there are any threats or concerns over time. BirdLife Botswana has implemented an extremely successful bird population monitoring program, which has been in existence for the past 9 years. It provides access to current information on the status and trends of wild birds in Botswana and is aiming to keep common birds common. The program's objectives are to develop a wild bird index for Botswana, which will show population trends over time, and to use these trends to set conservation priorities, as well as guiding relevant legislation to report on biodiversity changes. The program currently has 300 volunteers, which contribute data every February and November. Examples of the trends are on your screen, which come out of this 9-year data set running from 2011 to 2019. On the right-hand side, you will see a sharp decline in the yellow-billed kite numbers, and on your left-hand side, a steady decline in the vulture populations in Botswana. Rural communities and local bird guides are integrally involved in this project. The communities have begun to appreciate birds in their backyards. They plant more trees to support them. They put water and food out to attract them. And as one of the bird guides aptly said, "I have grown my passion for birds and have used the passion to influence others to love birds and perceive them as important to the ecosystem." In 2020, this program was also instrumental in providing information to feed into the national report on Botswana's state of the environment. So once again, we can see how vitally important this type of information is. Now moving on to area-based conservation work, one of the tools that I'm sure many of you have heard of in previous talks in the series is key biodiversity areas, which are areas of importance for various species or ecosystems. This looks at sites which have a high proportion of species that are either at risk of going extinct, are found in really restricted or small areas, areas which are irreplaceable and if removed would be a huge problem, or have high intact ecological communities, Or lastly, they contain large portions of a particular life history stage of a species. For example, that might be the breeding population of a species. So essentially these sites, these key biodiversity areas, are the most important sites for biodiversity, and protecting these areas will have the highest success in conserving priority biodiversity. Knowing where these areas are also helps for ensuring sustainable development in each of the countries that we work in. And many of your large funding agencies at this stage are only looking at working in countries that have biodiversity areas assessed, or where we know where they're not going to be affecting these high levels of biodiversity through their developments. These areas are also of national, regional, and international importance, and countries are encouraged to report these internationally as part of their international reporting obligations. Another tool is the recognizing and reporting of other effective area-based conservation measures, or otherwise known as OECMs. OECMs are defined as a geographically defined area, so they must have a boundary other than a protected area, so they cannot be a national park, for example, that are governed and managed in ways to achieve positive and sustained long-term outcomes for the in-situ conservation of biodiversity with their associated ecosystem functions and services, and where applicable, cultural, spiritual, and social, economic, and other locally relevant values. This is a relatively new tool which can be used to safeguard areas such as key biodiversity areas, or areas that are just buffering our national parks, or those that are owned by local communities. It can help to expand areas recognized for their conservation value, even if conservation is not the primary goal of the area. Two examples, just to illustrate what an OECM is, are shipwrecks, which are usually more historic or culturally important, but are important for nursery areas for fish to breed in. A second example is a military site, which often has a buffer area or a protection zone around the infrastructure, which is often left intact and is conserving nature. Countries are now required to report OECMs internationally as part of the Convention on Biological Diversity. So we need to build the capacity and to ensure and enable these countries to do this effectively, and not just to choose locations which do not achieve conservation but look good on paper. So some examples coming up for this is BirdLife South Africa and South Africa are world leaders in key biodiversity areas and OECM work. South Africa was the first in the world to complete a comprehensive national KBA assessment for all ecosystems and across multiple groups of species. And it's really encouraging to see that we have more than 540 KBAs in South Africa. South Africa is also one of the first countries through Daniel Marnowick to develop a methodology and to begin assessing OECMs in a partnership that includes government, IUCN OECM task force, and the broader conservation community. BirdLife South Africa has also recently led and co-authored the development of a global methodology to assess OECMs and to help guide other countries into assessing their OECMs as well. Another site-specific work, which includes habitat and improvements and rehabilitation, which is a key part of EFI to address one of the major threats I mentioned earlier, is through the Western Cape Estuaries Conservation Program, which looks at resident and migratory birds and their use of estuaries and how to better protect them. So to date, there's been more than 20,000 hectares of privately owned estuaries and catchment land that has been declared or is in the process of being declared as protected areas. This is no small feat. There is also a strategy in place with relevant government partners to increase the formal protection of 12 estuaries in the Western Cape, with the implementation already underway at the first site. Management and conservation actions currently underway within this project include the piloting of estuarine rehabilitation and bank erosion control methods. This is being done at the Berg River Estuary and is funded by the East Atlantic Flyway Initiative. Alien invasive plant clearing is underway, with more than 200 hectares already cleared at priority estuaries and key catchment sites in 2020 alone. And lastly, coordinated waterbird counts have been expanded since 2016, with additional accounts occurring at priority sites and an additional 4 new sites being included. So huge congratulations to Giselle Murison for the work she's achieved to date and continues to work hard on. Now moving further afield, Birdwatch Zambia has initiated a habitat restoration project in 2017, which focuses on introducing a biocontrol agent, a weevil, to control the invasive Salvina molesta weed, or also known as the Kariba weed, in the Lukanga swamp. The Lukanga swamp is a major wetland in Zambia and a designated World Heritage Site, and hosts approximately 360 resident and migratory bird species. There are currently 16 trained weevil monitors, and nearly 2,000 square kilometers have been cleared, providing an improved habitat for biodiversity and the provision of ecosystem services. The improved habitat also enhances the livelihood of local communities and provides food security for 2,500 fishing households. Moving to Zimbabwe, BirdLife Zimbabwe has initiated a project which seeks to balance biodiversity conservation and human livelihoods by building the capacity of local villages and demonstrating alternative non-wetland dependent income generating activities. This will help to reduce poverty as well as wetland habitat loss. 2 villages to date have been supported with poultry production income generating activities. A 3rd village is adopting pig production, and a 4th village is adopting beekeeping as an alternative livelihood. Another key outcome of this project is to improve the conservation of the endangered grey-crowned crane, the vulnerable wattled crane, and other important biodiversity in the area. 3 monitoring surveys have been conducted jointly by BirdLife Zimbabwe, the Environmental Management Agency, and Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management, as well as key members of the local communities, where they are monitoring breeding pairs and flocks of cranes. This project is located in the Driefontein grasslands and focuses on building the capacity for sustainable wetland management, fire management, and monitoring of the site. 44 hectares of key wetland habitat have been restored and protected, with the villages playing a huge leading role. 3 of the restored sites have been recolonized by cranes to date, and that they have bred successfully during the last breeding season. So another really successful intervention along the flyway. Lastly, I'm going to touch on policy and advocacy. We're engaging with international agreements and supporting countries to report against these agreements, as well as opposing unsustainable developments at these key sites for biodiversity, are all key aspects of the policy and advocacy work along the flyway. The EP project is supported by Melissa Lewis, the Policy and Advocacy Manager at BirdLife South Africa, who is also funded by the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. Some of the examples of support provided to regional partners include a submission of detailed comments which relate to diamond prospecting rights along the Orange River, as well as support provided to Birdwatch Zambia and BirdLife Zimbabwe in developing a position paper on the proposed hydroelectric scheme in the Batoka Gorge, as well as keeping a watchful eye and engaging in the Okavango, where a prospecting license has been granted to Recon Africa to explore 35,000 square kilometers for oil and gas in the Okavango Delta. This falls within the Kaza Transfrontier Conservation Area and also includes a World Heritage Site in Botswana. Now moving on to an international example of advocacy, further along the flyway, we move to the Tagus Estuary in Portugal. Lisbon is requiring a larger airport, and the Portuguese government is gearing up to build a new airport on the country's largest wetland, the Tagus Estuary, which covers approximately 320 square kilometers. The site has been chosen as it is utilizing a small Air Force base, which can be expanded upon. But the estuary is one of Europe's most important wetlands and one of the most important passage and wintering sites for waders and wildfowl in the East Atlantic Flyway. It supports up to 300,000 birds on their journey between Northern Europe and Africa, and around 200,000 birds over winter on the estuary. It is also a Ramsar site, a key biodiversity area, and a special protection area, and is internationally important for 12 water bird species. It's especially vital for near-threatened black-tailed godwits, where it supports 80,000, or more than a third of the total flyway populations. Birds using the estuary and the surrounding rice fields as a vital stopover site, including the black-tailed godwits, and so removing the site will be extremely detrimental to this and numerous other species. Environmental clearance, which is now valid for 10 years, has been granted based on a totally inadequate environmental impact study and insufficient mitigation measures based on the flawed premise that marginal areas will be restored, and that birds will be relocated. The potential consequences also extend beyond damage to the Tagus estuary itself. Because of its importance for migratory birds, damage or disturbance to the Tagus estuary will also have an effect on sites all along the migration route. The maps on the screen are based on ring recoveries and show how important the Tagus estuary is as a stopover and staging site that is linked to many countries and many species, including those listed next to the maps. On the one hand, the airport will be disturbing for the birds from noise and the shapes of the airplanes, but it's also unsafe for humans due to the risk of accidental bird strikes between the planes and birds. This seems to have been slightly overlooked and is being reevaluated as a major concern. Additionally, there will be an increase in noise and air pollution within the area. This development is clearly not the same as a small military airbase, which has infrequent flights and small crews when compared to an international hub with lots of traffic from commercial aeroplanes. So as I mentioned, the environmental impact study is inadequate, and it underestimates the disturbance that this type of development can have on the site. And it needs to take into account the wider impacts on bird populations outside of Portugal. The Portuguese government is now facing a legal challenge with lawyers from Client Earth and Speyer, who's the BirdLife partner in Portugal, together with 7 NGOs who filed a court action with the Lisbon Administrative Court. This is likely to be a very long court case and could take multiple years. Many other countries on the East Atlantic Flyway have invested heavily in the conservation of migratory birds, and BirdLife partners have come together to voice their concerns by writing letters of objections and sending in a video to the Portuguese government. Over 40,000 people have signed an online petition against this construction, and this was organized by VBN, the BirdLife partner in Netherlands, whose national bird is the black-tailed godwit. The BirdLife partnership has asked IFI to coordinate the international response to support the national court case. This involves coordinating policy and advocacy, research, and media work. Complaints have also been lodged with numerous international conventions, such as Ramsar and the Berne Convention. And the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds is employing a scientist to analyze data to show how important this estuary is for migrant waders across Northern Europe and Africa, and to construct a case to show the economic damage the airport might do by impacting on existing conservation work for waders in countries outside of Portugal. Media and social media are also being used to highlight the issue and gather support. So lastly, on a more happy note, there's been a lot of awareness around migrants, and it's really key in part of this work that we do. So just some of the awareness raising activities that we've had in this past couple of months is through the BirdLife South Africa's Wakkerstroom Centre. Through Christy Garland, we hosted the celebration of the World Migratory Bird Day in partnership with Spring Alive. As Melissa alluded to earlier, there is 2 World Migratory Bird Days. The first one coming up more recently now is in May, the 8th of May, which traditionally is celebrated more in the north as the birds are arriving back. There is a second one in the second month of October, and that's generally when the southern region celebrates the Migratory Bird Day. So in this case, it was utilizing a newly developed chasing migration board game, which was developed here in South Africa by Christy. And this game follows the migration of 7 species and involves safe stopover sites where they're able to replenish their energy and rest, as well as activities during which their energy is lost and the migration journey is made much harder. BirdLife South Africa, together with BirdLasser, also hosted a migratory bird challenge, which some of you may have participated in. We had 111 people participating, and they recorded in a 24-hour period 86 migratory bird species. This all adds to our data and knowledge of migrants in South Africa. And lastly, a successful social media campaign was used to highlight the amazing feats of many of these migrant species. These are the images from the social media campaign, which we ran for World Migratory Bird Day in October last year. So I thought I'd end the presentation with some incredible facts about these marathon migrators. Migratory birds undertake journeys of extreme magnitude for their size, with a bar-tailed godwit showing on your screen, known to go on a 9-day non-stop flight flying over 11,000 kilometers without feeding or resting. This is the longest non-stop flight of any bird. While the Arctic tern undertakes an annual record-breaking trip covering around 90,000 kilometers from pole to pole in search of the summer sunlight, it is no wonder the species inspired the BirdLife logo we currently use today. Barn swallows are the most abundant and widely distributed species of swallows in the world. Up to 88 million of them migrate from Eastern Europe to Asia to Southern Africa. These birds have already been spotted on their return journey in the UK in March this year. The common swift summer breeding range runs from Portugal, an island in the west, across to China and Siberia in the east. They breed as far south as Northern Africa, with a presence in the Middle East, in Israel, Lebanon, and Syria, in the Near East across Turkey, and the whole of Europe, as far north as Norway, Finland, and Russia. Swifts migrate to Africa using a variety of routes and spend 3 to 3.5 months in Africa and a similar time breeding, while the remaining roughly 6 months is spent on the wing, flying home or away. Sedge warblers are migratory, crossing the Sahara to get to their European and Asian breeding grounds to spend the winter in Africa. Loss of wetland habitats and feeding areas on migration, as well as the expansion of the Sahara Desert, pose threats to the sedge warbler's breeding population. At just 12 grams, these warblers migrate at night to avoid predation. They adopt a strategy of flying for up to 3 nights with very short rests in between, before refueling again and continuing on their journey. Lastly, the charismatic European roller is a bird that migrates annually between Eurasia and Africa, and whose numbers are known to be in decline. It is likely that the rollers we see in South Africa migrate from Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, and Libya. They migrate alone or in small groups during the daytime, and adult birds are often known to set off earlier than younger birds. So much like Europeans, they enjoy a visit to the Kruger National Park during the northern winter. Many of the migrant birds which you are regularly seeing are in decline. So I'd like to appeal that you do your part by collecting data on their arrival and departure dates, record their sightings, and get involved in any known monitoring programs. This data really does help to highlight the threats and allows us to tackle the conservation issues. So in summary, collaboration is key to achieve a healthy flyway in order to provide a safe space for these migrant birds to visit Southern Africa. So next time you see one of these special birds, consider how far they have traveled and what they have had to endure to get here, the end point on a very long journey. Thank you very much.
Bron, thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating, and what an incredible concept that you shared with us tonight. Just to see how far these birds are capable of traveling is really mind-blowing, and I think certainly an eye-opener for me. I know I've just come back from a very brief trip down to Kruger National Park, and the lack of migrants was noticeable. I was quite sad to see that everything's already headed off north. There were just a handful of barn swallows and bee eaters hanging around. But thank you so much, Bron. You really did an incredible job of highlighting the migratory birds and the conservation work that's going in across the BirdLife International Partnership. And I think it really just showcases what an incredible concept BirdLife International has created, and how working together we can work to conserve these birds that know no boundaries. So thank you, Bron. And just a reminder to everyone before we get into questions, as you exit the webinar tonight, there will be a post-webinar survey. Please take 2 minutes just to fill that in for us. It does help us get a bit of feedback on tonight's show, and also to ask you a few questions about this evening's webinar. And thanks to those of you who religiously fill them out every week. We really do appreciate it. Next week, Steve McKean and Brent Coverdale are going to be joining us. They're going to be talking about their work on the blue swallows of KwaZulu-Natal and all the work that they are doing to conserve the mist belt grasslands that these blue swallows use to breed in, an intra-African migrant species. So a nice follow on from Bron's talk this evening. Now, Bron, I'm going to kick us off with a more technical question, and I'm happy to jump in on this one, but I'll let you have a go first. I see Andrew Marshall is on the line, and it's great to have you with us, Andrew, who's a prolific ringer down in the Western Cape, I believe. But Andrew's asking what types of devices are being used to track these migrating birds, And do you know how small the smallest tracking devices are? So Bron, if you want to have a stab at that, otherwise I'm happy to pitch in as well.
Sure. So obviously you get a variety of devices, and obviously the simplest way just to even get an idea of a point A to B of where birds migrate is obviously through ringing. So that's also really important for people to report where they see birds ringed, because that also can give us an idea of where they're moving. But other than that, you get a variety of different GPS tracking devices that can be fitted to birds. Obviously, the size of the device will depend on the size of the bird, because you only want to put a device on of a certain percentage of the bird's body weight. And obviously, the size of your device will also depend on your battery life that's available. And in terms of the smallest tracking devices, to be honest, I'm not actually sure. I'm not sure if Melissa, you have an answer for that one.
Yep. Yeah. So a company called Cellular Tracking Technologies has come up with a device that is 0.63 grams. The only downside to that is you need an external network of receivers that can then pick up on that device moving through the landscape. And I think there's been some absolutely unbelievable work carried out on the likes of snow buntings and other small songbirds in the Americas, where they have an amazing network of receivers set up across the continent, and they are able to pick up on all sorts of small birds moving across the landscape, right from Mexico all the way up into Greenland and northern Canada. So we're not there yet as Africa, but any extremely rich people listening, if you want to really put in your money's worth to conservation, help fund a network of MOTIS receivers so we can start monitoring where all these small species are going. Butterflies, birds, all of our migratory species. It would be absolutely unbelievable to see a MOTIS network set up across Africa. And let's hope that we can get there at some point and really follow where all of our migratory birds are going. It's one of the big questions that we as South Africans sit with, trying to understand our birds that come and spend summer with us and where they ultimately end up. I'm thinking the likes of blue swallows and white-winged flufftails. But yeah, thanks so much, Bron. And it really is incredible to see the science that's come out from these tracking devices in understanding where our birds are going. And that leads on to our next question from Penny Abbott, who's asking if there's any evidence that migratory birds are making adaptations to their routes in response to these increased risks on their traditional routes. So if you'd like to speak to that, please, Bron.
Sure. Thanks for the question, Penny. Yes, there is evidence. In some cases, birds are not traveling as far. They may have to travel further, for example, if some of their stopover sites have been impacted. So there's definitely evidence that birds are making adaptations to their routes in response to these different risks that I did mention.
Absolutely. And I think a great example of that is the European honey buzzard. And we've seen steady increases of European honey buzzard sightings here in South Africa. And a PhD by Caroline Howes that was published about a year and a half ago has really showcased just how forest loss in East Africa is forcing these European honey buzzards to migrate almost double the distance in order to find suitable summer territories to spend their time with us here in the Southern Hemisphere. So definitely the birds are able to adapt, and thank goodness they can. But the physiological costs that come from doubling up your migration are certainly something that we're going to have to monitor going forward. And our colleagues up in the Northern Hemisphere will have to keep tabs on the breeding of those birds to see what's happening with that. Now, in terms of adapting to things that change, Bron, don't stress if you are not able to answer this one. I have done some Googling just in case. But I see we've got a couple of questions here speaking towards the steady shift in our north-south magnetic field in the world. As some of you may or may not know, the Earth's magnetic field does occasionally shift every couple of billion years, but it certainly does take a while. And if you look at it in geological terms, it is relatively rapid, but obviously in our lifetimes, it's not as quick. So would you like to speak to just how birds are able to adapt to this potential shift in magnetic poles and whether that will affect their ability to migrate and navigate across the world?
Sure. So as I mentioned in my talk, birds are able to use a number of tools. So if they're not able to use that one, they may change to use the sun or the stars or some of the other methods I mentioned. But much more than that, I'm afraid I'm not even going to go into.
No, I think that's a perfect answer, Bron. And as we said, we're not technical experts here this evening, but as Bron mentioned, many different ways that birds can navigate, and those visual cues that they use in navigating across the Earth's surface are certainly some of the more important things to tackle. All right, Bron, I see we've got a question here regarding yellow-billed kites. From Bonita Reed, and I know Bonita excused herself because she had unstable internet, but just in case she does manage to get onto the YouTube video, your Botswanan partners have showed declines in yellow-billed kites, and I know Becky Garbett in 2018 did an incredible road count survey where she resurveyed a count that had been done in the early 2000s, I believe, and she showed massive declines across most of our African raptors in the Botswanan landscape. Would you like to just speak to some of the potential reasons for these yellow-billed kites showing declines in that Botswana slide that you put up, please?
Sure. I'm first up going to say that I haven't looked at the data myself, so I cannot exclusively say what the reasons are. But I think climate change is definitely one of them. There's obviously the risk that these birds have to infrastructure, which I explained a little bit earlier, such as power lines and the impacts of wind turbines, and yeah, I think those are probably some of the reasons. Again, as I say, I haven't actually delved into the data myself.
For sure, and absolutely, I think just as an overall, I mean, conversion of habitat, these are far-ranging birds, yellow-billed kites that travel all over sub-Saharan Africa, and it's certainly the loss of good foraging open landscapes that these birds are suffering. And one of the interesting things about them is that they've actually adapted to roadways and will often scavenge on roadkill. And unfortunately, that obviously presents a risk of being hit by other vehicles if they do come down. And that's also going to be a threat to them. But I'm sure there are numerous threats we could go into this evening, but we won't dwell on that for now. Bron, you mentioned the amazing BirdLife challenge that you set up last year in the blink of an eye. I know that was very lastminute.com on our part, but we're hoping it's laid the foundation. Anytime. We hope that it's laid the foundation for a really exciting concept that we're going to take forward as BirdLife South Africa and the EFI project. Would you like to just speak to that BirdLife challenge a little bit more? And also, I see we've got a question here from Eleanor Mary, just saying whether there's a list of migratory birds that are found in South Africa that would be available for people who want to record presence and absence, and just to sort of raise awareness on what migrants we do actually get here in the country, please.
Sure. Okay, so I'll start with the first one. So as you mentioned, we set up a cause on BirdLife where people could sign up and specifically listed or kept the list of birds that they could report on to the migratory species that were found here. So not just the ones that were on the East Atlantic flyway, but any migrants that were coming down. So it could have been an inter-African migrant. And people were given 24 hours wherever they were to start logging those birds. And that gave us some really great data. And it'd be great if that could be continued. So using any of the apps, I'm familiar with BirdLife. You can record anywhere that you are, the presence of these birds, and you can go on sound or on visual, the number of birds. And so to answer the second question, is there a list available? There is definitely a list available of migrant species. And again, if there was interest, and also it's probably a great idea anyway, just to set up a migrant cause continually on potentially BirdLife as an option for people to start logging.
Absolutely. Henk Nel, Ernst Retief, I hope you're listening. We've got some work for you. And I think it really just, once again, we've done it many times on this webinar series. It really highlights the power of all of you, our citizen scientists out there. We, as BirdLife South Africa, are a small team. We sit in our offices a lot of the time. We can't get out into the field and keep tabs on all of these different birds and all of these different areas. So we really do rely on every single one of you being our eyes and ears out there, keeping tabs on what's going on with our incredible bird life. So a massive thank you to each and every one of you who take the time to log a bird that you see or submit your citizen science data to us, or the various other projects that are out there monitoring what's going on with our biodiversity. Thank you so much for the hard work that you put in. It is really appreciated and really invaluable for us as conservationists. We couldn't do our jobs without that kind of data, so thank you. Bron, I think we have unfortunately run out of time. I see we've gone over 8 o'clock. But I'd just like to say a huge thank you to you. I think you did a phenomenal job of raising the profile of our migrants and also the incredible work that is being done by the EFI project. And a huge thank you to all of the partners along that flyway that are working together to protect our birds that cross all of our boundaries and unite us together. So Bron, I don't know if you have any last sentiments you'd just like to raise with the audience before we close off tonight, but from me, thank you so much for rounding out our year of conservation conversations.
I think just very quickly, thanks Melissa, and thanks everyone for listening. And just not to harp on, but really if you can get involved in any of the monitoring and getting involved in logging birds, it really is helpful in the long term. So yeah, that's my plea really.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Bron. And is there anywhere on the website that people can find out more about those BirdLife challenges or anything like that, or do we still need to build that content?
I think I'll probably have to build that content.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, I will make sure that it falls underneath the EFI project in the coming weeks.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Bron. And that'll give us plenty of time through winter to get our logging actions ready as our migrants hopefully come back to us in the summer months. We're all gearing up to get chilly, so stay warm out there, everybody. Stay safe. Thank you all so much for joining us for yet another Tuesday night of Conservation Conversations. It has been an absolute blast spending the last year of Tuesday nights with all of you. Thank you for the support. We will be bringing you an exciting talk on blue swallows next week. Don't miss it. And if you're tuning in on YouTube, thanks for watching. We'll speak to all of you next week, Tuesday. Stay safe, everyone. Keep your eyes on the skies and keep enjoying those birds. Good night.
Good night.